The church bells rang across the small town of San Rafael, but they sounded more like funeral bells to Isabella Rodriguez. She stood in front of the cracked mirror in the tiny room behind the church, staring at herself in the white dress that felt more like a burial shroud than a wedding gown. Her hands shook as she tried to fix the veil that kept slipping from her dark hair. At 19, she should have been excited about her wedding day. Instead, tears kept rolling down her cheeks, no matter how many times she wiped them away. "Mija, you need to stop crying," her Aunt Rosa whispered, rushing into the room with a worried look. "Your face will be all red and puffy." Isabella turned away from the mirror. "I can't do this, Tia. Please, there has to be another way." Rosa's face softened, but her voice stayed firm. "You know there isn't. Your father owes too much money. If you don't marry Senor Blackwood today, we'll lose everything. The house, the land, everything our family has worked for." Isabella knew the story by heart. Her father Miguel had always loved gambling more than he loved his family. Card games, horse races, betting on anything that moved. For years, her mother had tried to stop him, but after she died 3 years ago, he got worse. Much worse. Now, he owed money to dangerous men. Men who had already come to their house twice, making threats. The only way out was this marriage to Thomas Blackwood, a wealthy rancher who needed a wife and was willing to pay Miguel's debts in exchange for Isabella's hand. "But he's so old, Tia," Isabella whispered. "And mean. You've seen how he looks at me. Like I'm a horse he's buying." Rosa took Isabella's hands in her own weathered ones. "Listen to me, child. Men like Thomas Blackwood, they're not gentle, but they provide. You'll have food, a roof, safety. That's more than many women get." Through the thin walls, Isabella could hear the church filling up with people. Not friends celebrating her happiness, but neighbors curious about the spectacle. Everyone in San Rafael knew this wasn't a love match. It was a business deal. The door opened, and her father stumbled in. Miguel Rodriguez had once been a proud man, but debt and drink had bent his shoulders and put gray in his black hair. He couldn't even look Isabella in the eye. "It's time," he mumbled. Isabella wanted to scream at him, to ask how he could sell his only daughter like cattle, to demand he find another way. But she'd had this fight with him a dozen times already. He always said the same thing. "What choice do I have? They'll kill us both if I don't pay." So Isabella took his arm and let him lead her toward the church doors. Each step felt like walking to her own execution. The church was small and simple, with wooden pews and a few candles for light. About 30 people sat scattered around, most of them looking more curious than happy. At the front, waiting beside Father Martinez, stood Thomas Blackwood. He was 42 years old with thin brown hair already going gray at the temples. Not ugly exactly, but there was something cold about his pale blue eyes. He wore an expensive black suit that made him look like an undertaker. When he saw Isabella walking down the aisle, his mouth curved into what might have been a smile, but it never reached his eyes. Isabella's legs felt like water. She stumbled once, and her father's grip on her arm tightened. "Keep walking," he hissed under his breath. Thomas watched her approach with the same expression she'd seen him use when examining horses at the market. Calculating, measuring, making sure he was getting his money's worth. When they reached the altar, Miguel practically shoved Isabella toward Thomas and stepped back quickly, as if he couldn't get away fast enough. Thomas took her hand in his, and his skin felt cold and dry. His grip was too tight. Father Martinez began the ceremony in Spanish, his voice echoing in the small space. Isabella tried to focus on the familiar words, but they seemed to come from very far away. She kept thinking about her mother, wondering what she would say about this day. Would she understand? Would she be angry? "Do you, Isabella Maria Rodriguez, take this man to be your husband?" The words hung in the air. Everyone waited. Isabella could feel Thomas's grip tighten on her hand, almost painful now. She looked out at the small crowd and saw her father's desperate face. Behind him sat Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store, shaking her head sadly. Old Pedro, who'd known Isabella since she was a baby, had tears in his eyes. Isabella started, then stopped. Her throat felt closed. Thomas leaned closer. "Say yes," he whispered, and there was something threatening in his quiet voice. "I do," Isabella whispered. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Thomas's voice was strong and confident when he made his vows. He slipped a simple gold ring onto her finger, and it felt heavier than chains. When Father Martinez said they could kiss, Thomas pressed his lips to hers briefly. His kiss was cold and possessive, nothing like the gentle kisses she'd dreamed about as a girl. "You may now present Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," Father Martinez announced, but his voice sounded tired and sad. The small crowd clapped politely. Isabella felt like she was watching everything happen to someone else. This couldn't be her life. This couldn't be real. After the ceremony, there was a small reception in the church hall. Mrs. Chen had made a simple cake, and someone had brought a fiddle. A few people danced, but Isabella sat at a corner table, still in her wedding dress, watching everything like she was behind glass. Thomas stood with a group of men talking business and drinking whiskey. Every few minutes his eyes would find her across the room. Each time, Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. "You need to eat something," Rosa said, sitting down beside her with a plate of food. Isabella shook her head. "I can't." "Listen to me," Rosa said quietly. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but you need to be smart now. Don't make him angry. Do what he says. Keep your head down and try to make the best of it." Isabella looked at her aunt. "Is that what you did? When you married Uncle Carlos?" Rosa was quiet for a long time. "Your uncle was different. He was poor, but he was kind. This is different. But you're strong, mija. Stronger than you know. You'll survive this." As the evening wore on, the crowd began to thin. Thomas appeared at Isabella's side. "Time to go home," he said. Home. Isabella's real home was the small adobe house where she'd grown up, where her mother had taught her to cook and sew, where she'd felt safe. Thomas's ranch was not home. It was just a place where she would live. Thomas's wagon waited outside the church. It was big and well-made, pulled by 2 strong horses. Everything about it spoke of money and success. Isabella climbed up onto the seat beside Thomas, and he snapped the reins. The ride to the ranch took about an hour. They drove through the desert landscape in silence, past cacti and scrub brush. The sun was setting, painting the sky deep orange and red. It should have been beautiful, but Isabella felt too numb to appreciate it. Thomas's ranch was bigger than Isabella had expected. The main house was built of stone and wood with a wide porch and large windows. There were several other buildings scattered around: barns, storage sheds, quarters for the workers. Everything looked prosperous and well-maintained. "This is your home now," Thomas said as they pulled up to the house. "I've got rules and you'll follow them. No visitors without my permission. No going to town alone. You'll take care of the house, cook my meals, and do what I tell you, understand?" Isabella nodded, not trusting her voice. Thomas helped her down from the wagon, but his hands lingered on her waist longer than necessary. "Good," he said. "We'll get along fine as long as you remember who's in charge here." Inside, the house was comfortable but cold. Nice furniture, but it felt more like a hotel than a home. Thomas showed her to a bedroom with a large bed covered in dark blankets. "This is our room," he said, and Isabella's stomach dropped. I thought maybe I could have my own room," she said quietly. "At least at first, until we know each other better." Thomas's face changed. The polite mask he'd worn all day slipped, and underneath Isabella saw something hard and mean. "We're married now," he said slowly. "That means you're mine. All of you. Don't think you can play games with me, girl. I paid good money for you, and I'll get what I paid for." Isabella backed toward the door, but Thomas was faster. He grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to hurt. "Don't even think about running," he said quietly. "Where would you go? Back to your gambling fool of a father? He sold you, remember? You're mine now, and the sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." He let go of her wrist and walked to the door. "I'll give you an hour to get ready. Then I'll be back." After he left, Isabella sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry. Big, ugly sobs that came from deep in her chest. She cried for her mother, who would never have let this happen. She cried for her father, who was too weak and selfish to protect her. She cried for the life she'd dreamed of with a kind husband who loved her and children who would grow up safe and happy. Most of all, she cried for herself, for the girl she'd been that morning, who still had hope. That girl was gone now, buried, under a white wedding dress and a cold gold ring. Outside her window, she could see the desert stretching away toward the mountains. Somewhere out there were people living free, making their own choices, but not her, not anymore. Isabella wiped her tears and stood up. Rosa was right about one thing. She was stronger than she knew. She would survive this. She had to. When Thomas returned an hour later, Isabella was 3 months had passed since Isabella became Mrs. Thomas Blackwood, and each day felt like a year. She'd learned to move quietly through the big house, to have Thomas's meals ready exactly when he wanted them, to speak only when spoken to. Most importantly, she'd learned to hide her true feelings behind a mask of calm obedience. Thomas wasn't physically cruel exactly. He didn't hit her or leave marks that others could see. But there were other ways to hurt someone. Cold silences that lasted for days. Cutting remarks about her family, her background, her worth. The constant reminder that she was property he'd bought and paid for. The worst part was the loneliness. The ranch was isolated, sitting in a valley surrounded by red rocks and desert scrub. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. Thomas had made it clear that she wasn't to leave the property without his permission, which he never gave. The only people Isabella saw regularly were the ranch hands. There was old Pete, who'd worked for Thomas for 20 years and barely spoke to anyone. Carlos, a young man about Isabella's age who sometimes gave her sympathetic looks but never dared speak to her when Thomas was around. And Maria, an older woman who came twice a week to help with the heavy cleaning. Maria was kind but careful. She'd worked for wealthy families her whole life and knew better than to get too friendly with the boss's wife. Still, she sometimes shared news from town or brought small gifts, a piece of ribbon, a bar of nice soap, once even a letter from Rosa. It was Maria who told Isabella about the Apache. "Senor Blackwood, he's very angry about the Indians," Maria said one morning as they hung laundry on the line behind the house. "He says they're stealing his cattle and scaring away the horses." Isabella had heard Thomas ranting about this at dinner the night before. According to him, the Apache were thieves and murderers who needed to be driven away or killed. He talked about organizing the other ranchers to do something about the Indian problem. "Are they really stealing cattle?" Isabella asked. Maria shrugged. "Maybe sometimes. But they were here first, you know. This was their land before any of us came. Now we take more and more, and they have nowhere to go." Isabella thought about this as she worked. She'd grown up hearing stories about the Apache, but they'd always seemed like fairy tales. Fierce warriors who could appear and disappear like ghosts. People who knew magic and could talk to animals. She'd never actually seen one. That changed on a Thursday morning in late spring. Isabella had been married for almost 4 months now, and Thomas had finally given her permission to gather herbs and wild vegetables near the stream that ran along the eastern edge of the property. It was a small freedom, but Isabella treasured it. For a few hours, she could be alone with her thoughts. The stream was beautiful, flowing clear and cold between red rocks. Cottonwood trees grew along its banks, providing shade from the desert sun. Isabella loved the sound of the water and the way the light filtered through the leaves. She'd been there about an hour, filling her basket with wild onions and mint, when she heard a horse approaching. Her first thought was that Thomas had come looking for her, and she felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. But when she looked up, she saw something that made her heart stop. The man on the horse was not Thomas. He was not like any man she'd ever seen before. He was huge, for one thing. Even sitting on his horse, Isabella could tell he was much taller than most men. His shoulders were broad and powerful. His skin was dark bronze from the sun, and his long black hair was tied back with a strip of leather. He wore buckskin pants and shirt, decorated with beadwork and patterns Isabella had never seen before. But it was his face that really caught her attention. Strong features with high cheekbones and a straight nose. And his eyes, dark brown, almost black, but not cold like Thomas's. There was intelligence there, and something else. Sadness, maybe. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Isabella knew she should be afraid. This had to be one of the Apache Thomas was always talking about. But instead of fear, she felt curious. The man spoke first, in heavily accented English. "You are the new wife." It wasn't a question. Isabella nodded, not trusting her voice. He slid down from his horse with easy grace. Up close, he was even more impressive. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, maybe more. But despite his size, there was something gentle about the way he moved. "I am called Ayana," he said. "It means eternal blossom in my language." Isabella found her voice. "I'm Isabella. Isabella," he repeated, and somehow her name sounded different in his deep voice, more musical. They stood there awkwardly, for a moment. Isabella knew she should probably run back to the house and tell Thomas that there was an Apache on their land, but something kept her feet planted where they were. "You have been crying," Ayana said suddenly. Isabella's hand went automatically to her face. She thought she'd wiped away all traces of tears, but apparently not well enough. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Ayana studied her face. "No, you are not fine. You are sad, like a bird in a cage." His words hit closer to home than Isabella wanted to admit. She turned away, pretending to busy herself with her basket of herbs. "I should go back to the house," she said. "Yes," Ayana agreed. "The pale man with cold eyes would not like you talking to me." Something in his tone made Isabella look at him again. "You know my husband?" "I know of him. He speaks of driving my people away. He says we are thieves and killers." Ayana's voice was calm, but Isabella could hear the anger underneath. "He takes more land each year. His cattle eat the grass my people's horses need. His men shoot at us when we come to the sacred places of our ancestors." "I don't know anything about that," Isabella said quietly. "No, but you know about cages." Ayana picked up a smooth stone from beside the stream and turned it over in his large hands. "I have watched you sometimes, walking alone. You look like my sister did before she died, like someone whose spirit is being slowly crushed." Isabella felt tears starting again. "I shouldn't be talking to you." "No, you should not." Ayana set the stone down carefully. But sometimes the heart needs to speak, even when it is dangerous. Despite everything Thomas had told her about the Apache, Isabella found herself wanting to know more about this man. "Is it true what they say? That you can disappear like smoke and talk to animals?" For the first time, Ayana smiled. It transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less intimidating. "Some of it is true. Some of it is stories to frighten children. I cannot turn into smoke, but I know how to move quietly through the desert. I cannot talk to animals, but I listen to them, and sometimes they have wisdom to share." "What do they tell you?" "That change is coming, that the old ways are dying, that my people must learn to bend or we will break." His smile faded. "That there are good people among the pale eyes, even if men like your husband do not see us as people at all." Isabella looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry. For what Thomas says. For what he wants to do. You are not responsible for his hatred. But I'm his wife. Doesn't that make me part of it?" Ayana was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "A flower that grows in bad soil is not bad itself. It is still a flower." Before Isabella could respond, they both heard the sound of horses approaching. "Multiple riders coming fast. Hide," Isabella whispered urgently. But Ayana shook his head. "It is too late, and I will not hide from them anymore." Thomas appeared through the trees, followed by Carlos and 2 other ranch hands. All 4 men had guns drawn. When Thomas saw Ayana, His face went dark with rage. "Get away from my wife. You savage," Thomas snarled, pointing his rifle at Ayana's chest. Isabella stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Thomas, he wasn't hurting me, we were just talking." "Talking?" Thomas's cold eyes fixed on her. What could you possibly have to talk about with this animal? Ayana straightened to his full height, standing next to Thomas, who was average-sized. He looked like a giant. "I was telling your wife about the plants that grow by the water. Some are good for healing, others are poison. Important to know the difference." It was clearly a double meaning, and Thomas caught it. His knuckles went white on his rifle. "Are you threatening me?" "I am teaching," Ayana said calmly. "It is what my people do. We share knowledge so that others might live better lives. The only thing I want to know from you is when you and your kind are going to leave my land." "Your land?" Ayana's voice remained level, but Isabella could see the anger in his dark eyes. "My grandfather's grandfather hunted here. My people buried their dead in these hills. We know every stream, every cave, every tree. How does it become your land?" "Because I have the deed. Because I paid for it with honest money." "Honest?" Ayana's mouth curved in what might have been a smile, but there was no humor in it. "You paid other pale eyes who took it from us with guns and broken promises. Very honest." Thomas raised his rifle higher. "I won't tell you again, Indian. Get off my property." For a moment, Isabella thought Ayana might actually fight. Despite being outnumbered and facing 4 armed men, he didn't look afraid. He looked like a mountain, solid, immovable, dangerous if pushed too far. But then he looked at Isabella, and something in his expression changed. He nodded once and walked to his horse. "This is not finished," Thomas called after him. Ayana swung up into his saddle with fluid grace. He looked down at Thomas, then at Isabella. "No," he agreed quietly. "It is not finished." After the encounter by the stream, Thomas watched Isabella like a hawk watches a mouse. For 2 weeks, she wasn't allowed outside alone at all. Carlos followed her everywhere, even to the chicken coop and the vegetable garden behind the house. It was humiliating, but Isabella endured it quietly. She'd learned that fighting Thomas only made things worse. But as the days passed and nothing happened, Thomas began to relax his guard. Business demanded his attention. Cattle to move, deals to make, meetings with other ranchers about the Indian problem. Gradually, Isabella was given small freedoms again. She could tend the garden alone. She could feed the chickens without supervision. And eventually, she was allowed to return to the stream to gather herbs. "But Carlos will check on you every hour," Thomas warned her. "And if I hear you've been talking to any savages, you'll never leave this house again." Isabella nodded obediently, but her heart was racing. She hadn't admitted it to herself before, but she'd been hoping to see Ayana again. There was something about the Apache warrior that she couldn't forget. Not just his size or his unusual looks, but the way he'd spoken to her. Like she was a real person, not just Thomas's property. The first few times she went to the stream, Ayana didn't appear. Isabella tried to tell herself she was relieved. It was safer this way, but she found herself looking toward the rocks and trees, hoping for a glimpse of a tall figure on horseback. On a hot afternoon in early June, her patience was rewarded. Isabella was kneeling by the water, filling her basket with wild mint, when she heard the soft sound of a horse approaching. Her heart leaped, but she forced herself to keep working, not looking up until the horse stopped nearby. "Hello, Isabella." She turned to see Ayana dismounting from his horse. Today he wore a shirt of soft white buckskin, decorated with blue and green beadwork that caught the sunlight. His long hair was loose around his shoulders, and he moved with the same quiet grace she remembered. "You came back," she said, then immediately felt foolish for stating the obvious. "Did you think I would not?" Isabella stood up, brushing dirt from her skirt. "I thought maybe, after what Thomas said, you might decide it was too dangerous." Ayana smiled, and again Isabella was struck by how it changed his whole face. "Many things in life are dangerous. That does not mean they are not worth doing." They stood looking at each other for a moment. Isabella felt that same strange flutter in her chest that she'd experienced during their first meeting. It was confusing and a little frightening. She'd never felt anything like it with Thomas. "How are you?" Ayanna asked gently. "Has he hurt you for talking to me?" Isabella's hand went automatically to her arm, where the bruises from Thomas's grip had finally faded. "I'm fine." Ayanna's dark eyes were too knowing. "You lie badly, Isabella." "It doesn't matter," she said quickly. "I'm used to it. You should not have to be used to such things." Ayanna moved closer, and Isabella caught a scent she'd never smelled before. Something clean and wild, like sage and wind. No woman should. "In my world, women don't have choices," Isabella said quietly. "We do what our fathers tell us, then what our husbands tell us. That's just how it is. In my world, women are honored. They choose their own husbands. They own their own lodges. They speak in council, and their words carry weight." Ayanna picked up a smooth pebble and skipped it across the water. "Your world seems very cruel to its women." Isabella watched the ripples spread across the stream. "What's it like, your world?" For the next hour, Ayanna told her about Apache life. He spoke of families who lived together in harmony, of children who learned by watching and doing rather than by being forced. He described ceremonies where the whole tribe came together to celebrate and give thanks. He talked about the deep connection his people felt to the land, how they saw themselves as part of nature rather than its masters. "It sounds wonderful," Isabella said wistfully. "It is not perfect," Ayanna admitted. "We have our own troubles, our own sorrows, but we are free. Even now, when the white man's soldiers push us from our homes, we are still free in our hearts." Isabella envied that freedom more than she could say. "Thomas says your people are thieves and murderers." "Some of my people have done bad things," Ayanna said honestly. "Just as some of yours have. When people are desperate, when they see their children hungry and their land stolen, they sometimes choose violence. But most of us want only to live in peace. Is that what you want? Peace?" Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. "I want many things. I want my people to be safe. I want the land to be healed from the wounds that cattle and mining have made. I want children to grow up knowing the old ways." He looked directly at her. "And lately, I find myself wanting other things as well." Something in his tone made Isabella's cheeks grow warm. "What other things?" Instead of answering, Ayanna asked, "Are you happy, Isabella? In your marriage? In your life here?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Happy? She couldn't remember the last time she'd even thought about happiness. Survival, yes. Getting through each day without making Thomas angry. But happiness? "I don't think about it," she said finally. "That is answer enough." They fell into a comfortable silence, sitting by the water. Isabella found herself studying Ayanna's profile. His face was strong and masculine, but there was gentleness there too. Intelligence. When he caught her looking, she blushed and looked away. "Tell me about yourself," Ayanna said. "Who were you before you became Thomas Blackwood's wife?" So Isabella told him about growing up in San Rafael, helping her mother in the kitchen and garden, about learning to read from the village priest, and how much she'd loved books and stories, about her dreams of maybe becoming a teacher someday, before her father's gambling debts made such dreams impossible. "You wanted to teach children?" Ayanna asked. "Yes, I know it sounds foolish, but I always thought I'd be good at it. I love learning new things, and I'm patient with people who don't understand right away." "It does not sound foolish at all. Teachers are precious among my people. We believe that those who can pass on knowledge to the young are chosen by the spirits." Isabella felt a warm glow at his words. Thomas had laughed when she'd mentioned her teaching dreams once, calling them silly girl nonsense. They met like this several more times over the next few weeks, always by the stream, always careful to watch for Carlos or any of the other ranch hands. Isabella told herself that they were just talking, that it was innocent. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She began looking forward to these meetings more than anything else in her life. She would lie awake at night thinking about their conversations, replaying Ayana's words in her mind. She started taking extra care with her appearance on the days she planned to go to the stream, braiding wildflowers into her hair or wearing her nicest dress. Ayana seemed to feel the same way. He brought her small gifts, a piece of turquoise polished smooth, a feather from a red-tailed hawk, once a necklace of tiny white shells that he said had come from the great water far to the west. "I cannot accept these," Isabella protested each time, even as she treasured every gift. "They are tokens of friendship," Ayana would say. "Among my people, friends exchange gifts to show respect and affection." Friendship. Isabella knew it was more than that, and she suspected Ayana did too, but neither of them spoke the word that hung between them like morning mist over the stream. Love. It happened gradually, so slowly that Isabella didn't recognize it at first. The way her heart jumped when she saw him approaching, the way his smile could brighten even her darkest days, the way she felt truly alive only during those stolen hours by the water, and she could see the same feelings growing in Ayana, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the way he listened to every word she spoke as if it were precious, the way he sometimes reached toward her, then pulled his hand back as if remembering some invisible barrier between them. The moment of truth came on a warm evening in late July. Isabella had convinced Thomas to let her gather evening primrose, which bloomed only after sunset. It was a risk, meeting Ayana in the growing darkness, but she was desperate to see him. He was waiting for her by their usual spot. But something was different. He seemed tense, worried. "What's wrong?" Isabella asked immediately. "There is talk among the ranchers," Ayana said without preamble. "They plan to attack my people, soon." Isabella's blood went cold. "Attack? But why? 3 of Blackwood's cattle were found dead last week. He blames us, though we did not kill them. Mountain lions most likely, or sickness. But he does not want to hear reason." "Thomas has been meeting with the other ranchers," Isabella said, remembering the closed-door conversations she'd overheard. "I thought it was just business talk. It is business to them, the business of driving us away so they can take more land." Ayana's jaw was tight with controlled anger. "They see us as animals to be hunted, not people with families and children. There has to be something we can do," Isabella said desperately. "Some way to stop this." "We?" Ayana looked at her intently. "Why do you care what happens to my people?" The question hung in the air between them. Isabella could give him a safe answer, something about not wanting anyone to get hurt. But as she looked into his dark eyes, Isabella returned to the ranch house that night with her heart full of hope and terror in equal measure. She'd made a choice that would change everything, but now she had to live with the consequences. More importantly, she had to find a way to warn Ayana about the planned attack without getting caught. For the next 2 days, Isabella moved through her daily routine like an actress playing a part. She cooked Thomas's meals, cleaned his house, and spoke when spoken to. But all the while she was listening, watching, gathering information. Thomas was more talkative than usual, energized by his plans. He seemed to enjoy having someone to boast to, even if that someone was just his wife. Over dinner on Tuesday night, he told her about his meeting with the other ranchers. "We're going to solve this Indian problem once and for all," he said, cutting into his steak with more force than necessary. "Jake Morrison lost 2 more head of cattle yesterday. Found them shot full of arrows." Isabella kept her face neutral, though her heart was pounding. "That's terrible." "Damn right it's terrible. These savages think they can steal from us with no consequences." Thomas took a long drink of whiskey. "Well, they're about to learn different. What are you going to do?" Thomas's cold eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "We're going to hit their camp tomorrow night. Quick and decisive. Show them what happens when they mess with white men's property." Isabella's fork clattered against her plate. "You're going to attack them? Don't worry your pretty head about it," Thomas said dismissively. "We know what we're doing. There's 12 of us, all good shots. We'll hit them fast and hard, scatter them to the winds. By Thursday morning, this territory will be safe for decent folk again." Isabella felt sick. 12 armed men against families with children. It would be a massacre, not a battle. She forced herself to take a sip of water, fighting down the nausea. "Where is their camp?" she asked as casually as she could. Thomas looked at her sharply. "Why do you want to know?" Isabella's mind raced. I worry about you. I want to know where you're going in case something happens." Thomas's expression softened slightly. It was the first time Isabella had ever expressed concern for his safety, and his ego lapped it up. "Smart girl. It's good that you worry about your husband." He leaned back in his chair. "They're holed up in Red Canyon, about 10 miles north of here. Think they're safe in those rocks, but we know every way. In and out." Isabella nodded and returned to her dinner, though the food tasted like sawdust. Red Canyon. She knew the place. She'd seen it from a distance during her rides with Thomas in the early days of their marriage. Tomorrow night, 12 men would ride there with guns and hatred in their hearts, unless she could warn Ayanna first. That night, Isabella lay awake next to her sleeping husband, planning. She couldn't leave the ranch without permission, and Carlos was still watching her carefully during her herb-gathering trips. But there had to be a way. There had to be. The answer came to her just before dawn. Maria was coming today to help with the washing. Maria, who'd lived in this territory all her life and knew everyone. Maria, who might know how to get a message to the Apache. Isabella waited until mid-morning when Thomas had ridden out to check on the cattle in the south pasture. As she and Maria hung wet sheets on the line, Isabella made her move. "Maria," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to promise you won't tell anyone." Maria's weathered face grew concerned. "What is it, Senora?" "Do you know any of the Apache? Personally, I mean." Maria went very still. "Why do you ask such a thing?" Isabella took a deep breath. "Because my husband and the other ranchers are planning to attack their camp tomorrow night. People are going to die. Men, women, children. I can't let that happen." For a long moment, Maria just stared at her. Then she glanced around to make sure they were alone. "You want to warn them?" "Yes. That is very dangerous, Senora. If your husband finds out..." "He won't find out. Not if you help me." Maria was quiet for so long that Isabella thought she was going to refuse. Then finally she nodded. "My cousin Juan works sometimes for the Apache. Trading horses, other things. He knows how to find them. Can you get word to them? Tonight?" "Maybe. But it will cost money. Juan, he don't do anything for free," Isabella thought quickly. She had a small amount of money hidden in her sewing box. Coins she'd saved from the household allowance Thomas gave her. "I have $20. That might be enough." Maria picked up another wet sheet. "What message do you want to send?" Tell them to move their camp. Tonight, before the moon sets. Tell them 12 armed men are coming to Red Canyon at midnight tomorrow." "I will try," Maria promised, "but Senora, you must be very careful. Men like your husband, they don't forgive betrayal." Isabella nodded grimly. She was already risking everything. What was a little more danger? That evening, Isabella played her part perfectly. She served Thomas his dinner, listened to him talk about his preparations for the raid, and even helped him clean his rifles. All the while, she prayed that Maria had been able to reach Juan, that Juan had been able to find the Apache, that Ayanna and his people were already packing up their camp. Thomas was too excited about the upcoming attack to pay much attention to Isabella's subdued mood. He went to bed early, wanting to be rested for the raid. Isabella lay beside him, listening to his breathing, counting the hours until he would discover that his carefully planned attack had found nothing but an empty canyon. She must have dozed because she was awakened by the sound of horses and men's voices in the yard. Gray dawn light was filtering through the windows. Thomas was already up and dressed, strapping on his gun belt. "Stay in the house today," he ordered. "Don't go outside for any reason. You understand me?" Isabella nodded obediently, though her heart was racing. Something was wrong. The raid wasn't supposed to happen until tonight. Why were the men here now? Through the window, she watched Thomas stride out to meet the other ranchers. She recognized most of them, Jake Morrison, the Miller brothers, old Sam Fletcher, all armed and angry-looking, straining to hear. Isabella caught fragments of heated conversation, found the camp empty, tracks heading south. Someone warned them. Isabella's blood turned to ice. They'd already been to Red Canyon. They'd found it empty and somehow figured out that the Apache had been warned. And now they were here, suspicious and furious. Thomas came back into the house a few minutes later, his face dark with rage. "Where were you yesterday afternoon?" he demanded. "Here," Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Washing clothes with Maria." "And you didn't leave the house, not even for a minute?" "No, Carlos was watching me, remember? He would have told you if I'd gone anywhere." Thomas stared at her for a long moment. Isabella could see him weighing her words, looking for any sign of deception. Finally, he nodded curtly. Someone tipped them off. "We got to the canyon just before midnight and found nothing but cold ashes and horse tracks. They'd been gone for hours." Isabella let relief show on her face. "Well, that's good, isn't it? No one got hurt." "Good?" Thomas's voice was dangerous. "Those savages made fools of us. Someone in this territory is working with them, and when I find out who, there's going to be hell to pay." He stormed out again, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Isabella sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. She'd done it. Ayana and his people were safe, at least for now. But her relief was short-lived. Through the window, she could see Thomas talking intensely with the other ranchers. They were making new plans, she realized. This wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Over the next few days, the situation grew worse. More cattle were found dead, not shot, with arrows this time, but torn apart by what looked like mountain lions or wolves. But the ranchers were in no mood for logical explanations. They blamed everything on the Apache. Thomas became obsessed with finding the person who'd warned them. He questioned everyone, ranch hands, townspeople, even the priest in San Rafael. His suspicion fell on anyone who'd ever shown the slightest sympathy for the Apache. Maria stopped coming to help with the cleaning. When Isabella asked about her, Carlos said quietly, "She's scared, Senora. People are saying she has Apache friends. Senor Blackwood, he's been asking questions about her." Isabella's heart sank. Had Thomas connected Maria to the warning somehow? She prayed that Maria was safe, that her cousin Juan had been careful. The tension in the territory was like a pot about to boil over. The Apache, driven from their camp in Red Canyon, were now moving more frequently, harder to track. Some of the younger warriors, frustrated by the constant harassment, began striking back. A fence was cut. A water tank was punctured. Nothing violent, but enough to enrage the ranchers further. "This means war," Thomas declared one evening over dinner. "No more games. We're going to hunt them down like the animals they are." Isabella tried one more time to be the voice of reason. "Maybe you could try talking to them, finding out what they really want?" Thomas looked at her like she'd suggested, talking to wolves. "You don't talk to savages, Isabella. You don't negotiate with thieves and murderers. You destroy them before they destroy you." "But what if they're not thieves and murderers? What if they're just trying?" Isabella touched her swollen cheek and made a decision that would change everything. She looked up at Thomas from where she knelt on the floor and saw something in his eyes that chilled her to the bone. This wasn't just anger anymore. This was hatred. And she knew that no matter what she said, no matter how she tried to explain, Thomas would never forgive her for what he suspected she'd done. "You want the truth?" Isabella said quietly, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Fine, I'll give you the truth." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "I'm listening." Isabella pulled herself to her feet, using the table for support. Her cheek throbbed, but her mind was crystal clear. "Yes, I warned them. Yes, I saved their lives. And no, I don't regret it." For a moment, Thomas just stared at her. Then his face contorted with rage. "You traitorous little—" "They have children, Thomas," Isabella continued, cutting him off. Babies, mothers, grandparents, you were planning to murder entire families while they slept. They're savages. They steal our cattle. A few cattle against dozens of innocent lives. How is that justice? Thomas grabbed her shoulders, shaking her hard. How long have you been talking to them? What else have you told them? Isabella felt something break inside her, not just her fear, but the last chains that had bound her to this life of pretense and submission. I told them that not all white people are like you. I told them that some of us believe in right and wrong. Thomas raised his hand to hit her, again, but Isabella didn't flinch. Go ahead, she said calmly. Beat me. Lock me up. Do whatever you want. It won't change what I did, and it won't bring back your chance to murder innocent people. Something in her tone must have gotten through to Thomas because he lowered his hand, but his grip on her shoulders remained painful. You're going to fix this. Tomorrow morning, you're going to take me to wherever these Indians are hiding. You're going to help me find them. No, the simple word hung in the air between them. Thomas's face went white with shock. What did you say? I said no. I won't help you hurt them. I won't be part of your hate anymore. Thomas released her so suddenly that she stumbled backward. You forget yourself, woman, you're my wife. You'll do what I tell you to do. I'm done being your wife, Isabella said with a clarity that surprised her. I'm done being your property. I'm done living in fear and calling it marriage. Thomas pulled his gun from his holster, pointing it at her chest. You'll do exactly what I say, or I'll put a bullet in you right here and tell everyone you were killed by Apache raiders. Isabella looked at the gun, then at Thomas's face. 6 months ago she would have begged. She would have promised to obey, to never disobey him again. But 6 months ago she hadn't known what love felt like. She hadn't known what it meant to be valued and respected. She hadn't known her own strength. Then shoot me, she said quietly, because I'd rather be dead than spend another day as your prisoner. For a long moment they stared at each other. Isabella could see Thomas calculating, weighing his options. Killing her would be satisfying, but it would also raise questions, and he still needed her to find the Apache. Finally, Thomas holstered his gun. You think you're brave? You think your Indian lover will save you? His smile was cruel. He can't. He won't. And when I catch him, I'm going to make him watch while I teach you what happens to faithless wives. You have to catch him first, Isabella said. And Ayanna is smarter than you, stronger than you, better than you in every way that matters. Thomas's face went dark at the admission that she knew the Apache warrior's name. Lock yourself in the bedroom, he snarled. Don't come out until I tell you to, and don't think about running. I'll have Carlos watching the house all night. Isabella walked to the bedroom without another word. She heard Thomas storm out of the house, heard him calling for Carlos and the other ranch hands. Through the window she watched him gesturing, angrily, giving orders. But Isabella wasn't planning to run. Not yet. First, she had to find a way to warn Ayanna that Thomas knew about them, that he was coming with blood in his eyes and nothing to lose. She waited until well after midnight when the house was quiet. Thomas hadn't come to bed. He was probably drinking with his men, planning his next move. Isabella slipped out of the bedroom and made her way to the kitchen, moving as quietly as she could. There was writing paper in Thomas's desk, and she used it to pen a quick note. She told Ayanna that Thomas suspected their relationship, that he was planning something terrible. She begged him to take his people and go far away, to somewhere Thomas could never find them. She ended the note with words she'd never written before. I love you. Be safe. Getting the note to Ayanna was the hard part. Isabella knew Carlos was watching the house, but she also knew Carlos wasn't a bad man, just a young man trying to make a living in a hard world. She found him sitting on the porch smoking a cigarette and looking miserable. Carlos, she whispered through the window. I need your help. He looked startled. Señora, you should be sleeping. I need you to take a message to the Apache, to warn them that Thomas is planning something terrible. Carlos shook his head immediately. I can't do that. Señor Blackwood would kill me. He's going to try to kill innocent people, Carlos. Children. Babies. That's not my business. Isabella studied his face in the moonlight. You have a little sister, don't you? In Mexico? Carlos nodded reluctantly. How old is she? 7? If someone was planning to hurt her, wouldn't you want someone to warn you? Carlos was quiet for a long time. Then, almost against his will, he said, What kind of message? Isabella slipped the folded paper through the window. Just make sure they get this, please. Carlos took the paper with shaking hands. If he finds out, he won't. I promise. After Carlos left, Isabella returned to her room and waited. She dozed fitfully, waking at every sound. Just before dawn, she heard horses in the yard. Through the window, she saw Carlos returning with several other men. Thomas met them, and they spoke in low, urgent voices. Isabella couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the satisfaction on Thomas's face. Her heart sank. Had Carlos betrayed her after all? Thomas came into the house a few minutes later. Get dressed, he ordered. We're leaving. Where are we going? Your boyfriend got your message, Thomas said with a cold smile. And he's coming here. Isabella's blood went cold. What? That's right. Instead of running away like a smart savage, he's coming to get you. My men saw him and 2 others heading this way about an hour ago. Thomas's smile widened. I've got 12 men hidden around this house. When your Apache shows up, it's going to be like shooting fish in a barrel. Isabella felt like the world was spinning around her. You're going to ambush him? I'm going to kill him, slowly. And I'm going to make you watch. Thomas grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the front door. Come on. I want you outside where he can see you. Bait for the trap. Isabella tried to pull away, but Thomas was too strong. He dragged her onto the porch and forced her to sit in one of the wooden chairs. Then he used rope to tie her arms behind, her back and her ankles to the chair legs. Thomas, please, Isabella begged. Don't do this. He's coming because he loves me, because he wants to protect me. Good, Thomas said, checking the knots. Love makes a man stupid. Makes him easy to kill. The sun was fully up now, and Isabella could see Thomas's men positioned around the ranch buildings. They had rifles and were watching the horizon like hunters waiting for prey. Isabella closed her eyes and prayed. She prayed that Ayana would see the trap before it was too late, that he would turn around and ride away, that he would choose his own safety over trying to rescue her. But even as she prayed, she knew it was hopeless. Ayana wouldn't abandon her. It wasn't in his nature. He would come and Thomas would kill him, and it would be all her fault. An hour passed, then another. The sun climbed higher and the desert heat began to build. Thomas paced back and forth on the porch, his rifle in his hands, growing more impatient by the minute. Where is he? He muttered. Carlos said they were only an hour out. Isabella didn't answer. She was scanning the horizon desperately, hoping to see nothing, hoping that somehow Ayana had figured out the trap and decided not to come. Then she saw him. 3 riders appeared on the ridge to the north, sitting motionless on their horses. Even at this distance, Isabella could tell which one was Ayana. He was unmistakable, tall and straight in his saddle, his long hair flowing in the wind. There, Thomas said with satisfaction. Right on time. Isabella watched in horror as the 3 riders began moving down the slope toward the ranch. They rode slowly, carefully, as if they suspected danger. But they kept coming. Please, Isabella whispered to Thomas. Call it off, let him go, I'll do anything you want. Too late for that, Thomas said. He raised his rifle and fired a shot into the air. It was a signal to his men. The Apache riders stopped about 200 yards from the house. Isabella could see them talking, pointing. They knew it was a trap now, but they were too exposed to retreat. Then Ayana did something that made Isabella's heart stop. He slid down from his horse and began walking toward the house. Alone, unarmed, his hands raised to show he carried no weapons.